And welcome in to Pressbox Live on Facebook Live. I'm Stan the Fan Charles, along with Gary Stein, and joining us is our guest Keith Mills, who I'm going to introduce in just a second. But I do have to tell you that Pressbox Live is brought to you by C3 American Exteriors. Go to their website at c3america.com to get a brand new roof for just the cost of your insurance deductible. Welcome in. And as I say, it's a pleasure to have a halftime resident of Baltimore, but a halftime resident now in Sarasota, Florida, and that is Keith Mills. Keith, how are you, buddy?
Doing great, guys. Stan, always a pleasure. Gary, great talking to you, buddy. Looking forward to this.
Look at that tan.
A little sunburn up here, though.
I had a funny story the other night. You know the baseball writer from Dayton, Hal McCoy? He's in the Hall of Fame.
Sure.
Hal covered the Reds, still does for the Daily Dayton News, does a blog. But the Reds trained in Cincinnati for 10 years. In
Sarasota. Yeah.
Sarasota. So the other night I'm having him on and we're saying, are you going to spring training? He goes, nah, I can't get to spring training. But my wife and I are leaving tomorrow morning for Sarasota. And I said, what? Because you love Sarasota? He goes, my wife and I fell in love with Sarasota.
Oh. Yeah, they were here right before the Orioles took over full time, between the White Sox and the Orioles.
That's right.
Great town. Keith,
no question.
We got a lot to talk about. In the last couple of days, we lost a couple local folks or local Tide folks. One was Vi Ripken, kind of the matriarch of Baltimore Oriole baseball. And today we get word that at 88 years of age, the former skipper of the Baltimore Orioles, last one to lead them to a World Series victory, Joe Altobelli, passed away. And a whole host of other baseball luminaries this past year went. It's kind of getting to be that time for us.
It really is. It's funny, Stan, not funny, but it's interesting. A few minutes ago, about an hour ago, I was with Jimmy Henneman and Scott McGregor and some Orioles, former Orioles players up at a restaurant, Lakewood Ranch. And we were all talking about that. And Jimmy was talking about this time last year, he got word that his good friend and Baltimore legend Al Kaline had passed away. And there's been a domino effect all year since then, up until, like you said, just this week with Alto and Vi Ripken. But yeah, we are in that age group. And Scotty McGregor was on that World Series team that Altobelli led in 1983, the year after Earl. And obviously, we were all picking Scotty's brain tonight about what it was like playing for Alto. He said, "Hey, he just let us play. He knew we were really good. He knew we had a chip on our shoulder coming off the '82 season, and just kind of was the anti-Earl and the perfect complement for what those guys wanted to do."
And one other person we'd be remiss if we didn't mention who's passed away in the last 12 months is our friend, the legend, Vince Bagley.
Vince Bagley and Ted
Patterson. What did Vince mean to your career, Keith? I mean, you were never working for the same channel. You worked at 13 and then 2. He was at 11, but you must have gotten to know him fairly well. We just lost your voice. Maybe flip your mic back on. There we go. Let's see if we can ask to unmute. I don't know how to unmute him. You know how to unmute yourself, Keith?
Right there. I think I just did. How's that?
There we go.
Great.
Yeah.
Great. All right.
So, we grew up, Stan, watching Vince, and Vince made it cool back in the day to cover the local sports.
Yep.
In addition to being, the voice of the Colts and just this iconic figure in the Baltimore area, I remember as a kid watching him do the highlights of not just, City Poly and Calvert Hall, Loyola, and Turkey Day, but, Towson Delaney lacrosse and Poly Patterson baseball and just whatever big football game it was. So, by the time I got to Channel 13 in terms of being a sports producer, we wanted to emphasize and do what Vince Bagley did and try to capture that market. And then in addition to that, he was just one of the most gracious, classy gentlemen with no ego that I've ever met in or out of this business. So he kind of taught me personally, and I think all of us that came on the air and followed in his footsteps, how to do it the right way. And I'll never forget walking around Camden Yards. Scott Garcer and I were walking around Camden Yards with him right when Camden Yards first opened. And I mean, everybody and their mother came up to him.
Yep.
Hey, Vince, and handled it with so much class and grace. And I asked him, I said, how do you do it? He goes, one thing to remember is if they come up to you, it means they're watching or they're listening, whether they're happy or whether they're nice to you or whether they got a bone to pick. And I'll never forget that.
But it's interesting, before I turn you over to Gary for a couple of questions, it's interesting that it was his highlighting local that may have shaped a good portion of what you became, because you sort of grabbed that mantle and have always been the guy who covered the locals.
I appreciate that. Before I got into TV, I worked at the News American for John Stedman.
Yep.
So I was shaped by not only Vince, but John. And John allowed me to go out and cover high school sports when I was basically just a glorified intern for him when I got out of high school. So that kind of was the roots of it. And then watching Vince when I was growing up and then getting to know him, and still, even though he was a superstar icon, he still covered the high schools and he still covered the local colleges, and he still made it a point to flaunt what the men and women who were coaching those kids were doing as well. So yeah, he had an enormous imprint on me. And then when I got to Channel 2, Scott Garceau allowed me the freedom to do that as well. And Scott and Vince were, as you know, they were great friends, but one and the same in regards to no ego. And it was all about the team and what we were doing as a unit. So I owe both of those guys a tremendous amount.
So Keith, I've been here since 1987. So what are we going on? 34 years now.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm an honorary Baltimorean, at this point, although I wasn't born and raised. But my question to you is something a little bit different. And that is, we all have the privilege of being in the sports business, the sports media business, talking about sports, things that we love, et cetera, et cetera. But you have an interesting twist on that, in that you've been able to do it in a town where you were born and raised. I wasn't able to do that. Not Stan. I know you've been here for a long time, but I don't think you were
I was born in DC. Yeah.
Correct. So how does that feel, Keith, to grow up as a kid, watch these guys play on the same fields that they covered, and now you covered them, and you felt what they felt all those years?
Oh, Gary, that's a great point. Privileged, to say the least. Blessed. I'll never forget when Al Sanders was the person that actually taught me into going on the air at Channel 13, and he was larger than life to me over at Jay's. Jerry Turner got a lot of the ink, but Al was just as behind the scenes powerful over there. And he said to me, he goes, "It's time." And I said, I was 3 years into my sports producer tenure. I said, "Time for what? What, am I getting fired or what? Time for what?" He goes, "No, it's time. It's time for you to go on the flip around and go in front of the camera, because you have a perspective that few do. You grew up playing against the same kids that you're reporting on now. Their fathers and their mothers. So you've got to do this. You've got to make the jump." And I said, "No, I don't want to do it." He goes, "You have to do it. You owe it to yourself. You owe it to your career. And you owe it to the people of Baltimore." So, Gary, I cannot tell you how humbling it's been. And Vince and I share this conversation, because Vince grew up in Baltimore as well, and he took the same route. And he said, "Don't ever take it for granted."
Gary, we just got a big scoop. Keith Mills, women's sports as well as
men's
sports.
I've been covering some of the girls that I've played. I went to school with, whose mothers played. I'm sorry. You get the point.
Yeah, I did get the point.
Hey, Keith, along those same lines, you kind of developed that niche there for high school sports. But I wonder, your dad preceded you in the business, correct?
Oh yeah.
So I'm just wondering, was it your dad's influence that influenced you to get into the business, or was it sports that influenced you to get in?
It was both. I grew up in the Channel 13 studio. I mean, literally grew up there. Saturday mornings, we go watch cartoons. So I got a chance to see Jerry Turner when he first started. John Kenley was a sportscaster at that time, and they would allow me into their little world. And I would watch how my father would treat people and get treated by the talent. So that had an amazing influence on me. But when I got into the business, my father told me, two things that I never forgot. One, never chase the money. And two, take care of the people who take care of you, the producers, the editors, the photographers, the assignment desk, all the people that you don't see that have a lot to do with getting the product on the air. Scott Garceau had that same mindset. Randy Blair, who was my first boss at Jay-Z before he passed away, had that same mindset. And Al Sanders certainly did as well. So my father had a lot to do with the success of Channel 13. He ran the softball team, the basketball team. He was a PR machine up there. He was really close with everybody on the air, and I saw how they interacted. So that had a tremendous amount of influence. But the biggest thing that my father did for me, Gary, was expose me to, was have me, he introduced me to John Stedman. And John Stedman opened the door for me to get into the business from a print perspective, which allowed me to get the job at Channel 13 as a sports producer because I had done a lot of local sports, and Randy Blair wanted to bump that part of our coverage up. So, yeah, but to answer your question, man, my father was his own, he left his own imprint on not just me, but a lot of people he worked with as well. But, oh, yeah, man, I grew up on the lap of some great people. I mean, Oprah Winfrey was there when I got the BA or Jay-Z. I started in 1979. And Oprah Winfrey would go down to the legendary 4100 Club after late shows with my father and Al Sanders and half the crew. And they'd sit there till closing time, and we'd BS and we'd do all this stuff. And she obviously went on and became a superstar. And but she laid the foundation for me as well. How she treated people, how she wanted to be treated by those same people in the business, left a tremendous imprint on me.
You mentioned somebody, Keith, and Randy Blair. He's been gone a long time. Was Randy, in your estimation, would he have been in Baltimore all this time, or was he a guy that was so good that he would have gotten gobbled up by an ESPN or something like that?
He would have stayed because of Vince. Because Vince tells everybody, don't be in such a rush to leave Baltimore. It's a great sports town. And Randy grew up in the DC area in Montgomery County. So he had roots both in DC and Baltimore, but he was one of us. And he was, Chris Thomas was the same way. Chris ended up going to Tampa eventually before he passed away. But, Mark Viviano's done the same thing. Jerry Sandusky's done the same thing. You might have designs to go to New York or Philly or DC, the bigger markets with the more money. But once you get a reputation here, it becomes you become a part of the family. So yeah, Randy would, man, he would still be here, no question about it.
He would still be here. Interesting. Yeah. Keith, I haven't talked to you for a long time about your drug addiction. Which is something which I really have appreciated over the years. You don't shy away from talking about it. I have a different addiction. I was a gambling addict for a long time, and I talk about it pretty openly. But how are you doing with that? And could you remind folks out there who might go, yeah, I remember that. Like, what happened to you? How did the dynamic set you up to fail?
Yeah, great. That's a great question. And before I get into that, I'm going to embarrass you, my friend, because when I came out of that journey, the rehab and the legal issues, you were one of the few people that actually stood behind me and gave me a chance through press spots to get back into the business. And I will never, ever, ever forget that. I'll get into some other people a little bit later about it. But what happened was I had a severe back problem. That was probably a part of growing up playing a lot of sports and this and that and this and that. And I went to a very noted back surgeon in town whose son was actually an All-American lacrosse player at Princeton, went to Gilman. And we made a decision to whether back surgery or pain management. And we both elected pain management. Pain management at the time meant muscle relaxers and narcotic drug called, for me, hydrocodone. And I went to a pain management clinic in Catonsville to handle that. Was seen by a doctor there. And so anyway, I ended up abusing the narcotic part of that to the point where I got addicted to it. To condense the story, I got addicted to it. I became a functioning drug addict in regards to no one knew I was struggling. My ex-wife, my kids, my father, Scott Garceau, who I saw every day. And anyway, it became so consuming that eventually I had to go. I approached my ex-wife, my father, and Scott, and I said, "Hey, I got a problem." So I went to rehab at Father Martin's the first time, and I came out of it thinking, "Hey, man, I got this under control." And Gary, you'll find this kind of interesting. This is a blast connection. And Ed Hale was another person. Ed Hale was another person who reached out to me after I had been, after I had went through my journey. Stan, Ed, and Nestor Aparicio was one, and John Maroon of Ripken Baseball was the other. Anyway, long story short, so what I didn't understand, though, when I went to rehab the first time was the relapse process. I totally dismissed that because I didn't think I needed it. I didn't think I got the drugs out of my system. I was fine. I was going to be different. Slowly, I noticed that I was starting to think about the narcotic again. And my next door neighbor was a cancer patient. And I never forget knocking on her door, trying to do some work for her around her house one day, and I noticed a vial of pain medication on her end table. And I was almost a year clean. I had not taken a pain pill since I got out of rehab. So this was January of 2005. So Gary, I was taping the Blast Show at Channel 2 on 11:30 on a Thursday morning. Went home, took my dog out for a walk, and as casually as we're talking, I walked into my neighbor's house, picked up the pain medication, walked into my house, and I don't know what I was going to do with it, but I needed it. It was consuming me. I didn't even take it. 5 minutes later, knock on the door, 2 Anne Arundel County police detectives who I and my father knew real well said, "Hey, went through, hey, what were you doing 5 minutes ago? What did you take?" Well, anyway, what I didn't know was my neighbor had her house robbed about 6 months before. She had a camera put in, and they documented this on camera. Anyway, long story short, so I go to rehab a second time, and I really listened to the whole package this time. Yeah. And I came out about a month later, thinking I had a handle on it. And to this day, you never take it for granted, guys, and I don't. But I do understand now the do's and don'ts of the relapse process. And also by going out and making my story public has been tremendous therapy. And it always keeps me on edge every time I go out, which unfortunately during the pandemic, I haven't been able to do a lot, but hopefully to start that up again when I get the chance. But Stan, you and then obviously Ed Kiernan and Mark Miller at
WAL folks gave you a real opportunity.
Allowed me to I was damaged goods, man. They allowed me to get back on the horse, you included. And, fortunately, I was able to kind of
it's great that you were able to come out on the other end of it, a whole person again.
Absolutely.
Functioning and everything. I thank you for sharing that. Gary, go ahead.
No problem. Thank you, brother. You and I will be brothers forever.
I love you. You know I love you.
Here. And you and I had some deep talks about the addiction and this, the addiction scenario. Yeah.
So Keith, gonna be a weird segue here because that story is more important probably than anything that we're ever going to discuss. But one of the benefits of being the next dean of Baltimore sports, let's put it that way. Okay, I mean maybe that's a little too much. I don't know. But the fact of the matter is that you've been here for a long time, and it's interesting. Sports ebbs and flows. The Orioles are good, they're not good. The Colts were good, they weren't good. They leave. The Ravens, good, not good. In the late 60s, and I wasn't here, must have been a great time for Baltimore sports, obviously. The Colts were, of the top. The Orioles were at the top. But I wonder, and
the Bullets.
Ebbs and flows,
don't forget the Bullets,
Bullets.
Absolutely, the Bullets, right? But then talk to me a little bit about the juxtaposition in the 80s. When the Orioles were still on top, they win the World Series in '83. The Colts are no good, and then all of a sudden they leave town. So from the high, you go to the low. Just what do you remember about those days covering those teams at that time?
Yeah, you mentioned it, the roller coaster. The Colts team that I really got into was the Burt Jones era in the mid 70s. Obviously Johnny U and those guys, they were my father's era, and we followed them. But man, Burt Jones and Lionel Mitchell and Stan White, Dutton, the Sat Pack, man, they were my generation's team. So when Bob Irsay's influence really took hold and they became to deteriorate to the point in the late 70s, early 80s, they were the laughing stock of football. It was sad. And the old guard Colt fans in our generation were devastated by the fact that they were a bad football team. Burt Jones just got traded. They were horrible. And then Irsay just totally screwed up the Elway situation. And the next thing you know, they were gone. And that came on the heels of the elation of the Orioles World Series championship, which none of us thought at the time it would be the last one. Only one since,
right?
Because they were still a powerhouse organization. But the roller coaster ride of that was interesting to be in the middle of it as at that time a sports producer and then eventually on the air at Jay-Z and Channel 2. And it was funny because it was almost surreal the day the Colts left. I mean, no one even thought it was really happening. The snowy night with the vans at Owings Mills, and then the wake up that next day and say, "Man, the Colts are gone. What, are you kidding me?" So yeah, Gary, great point. The emotions of everyone from fans to people that worked in the peripheral, like ushers and concessionaires, and from the players on down to the staff, was just shell shocked. Yet there was the Orioles, and Maryland basketball at that time too was still very relevant. But it was, and the Bullets were now at that time down in D.C. So it was just a one horse. Yeah, in Largo, there was just a one horse town at that time, and then not long after that, they became irrelevant. They struggled in the late 80s, obviously in the early 90s. So Baltimore went from this bastion of champions, like Tampa got all the Tampa, of course, with the Lightning, the Rays, and the Bucks. Well, Baltimore, the Orioles won the World Series in 70. The Colts won the 70 championship, 71 Super Bowl, and the Bullets played the Bucks in the NBA Finals that year as well. So they were there in 1970. And man, we were pounding. And the Clippers, I think, won the AHL championship that year. So everybody's pounding their chest saying, "Look at us!" And man, 15 years later, Baltimore sports scene was
like
a
one-horse town. Yeah,
really it was a one-horse town, and that horse was struggling.
And Keith, along the same lines, though, and I just go back to the high school sports for a minute, despite all that stuff, despite all the roller coaster stuff, ups and downs, Orioles, Ravens, basketball, whatever it is, it always seemed to me, and this is more of a comment than anything, but it always seemed to me that you had a ballast, and that ballast was high school sports.
Oh.
Because no matter what happened with the professional sports, he signed, he didn't sign, got traded, didn't get traded, whatever it was, this guy left town, Irsay, you always seem to revel and enjoy that aspect of sports. And I think you brought that to everybody.
Great point,
I appreciate
Gary. Great point, Gary.
I appreciate that, Gary. I had a lot of support from management, Scott, the photographers and editors that helped us. But the influence that my coaches had on me when I was growing up, football, basketball, and baseball in high school was extraordinary. Tim McMullen, you guys know Paul McMullen.
Yeah, Paul,
His brother Tim was my football, basketball, baseball coach in high school, and he left an unbelievable imprint. And as I got older and I ran into all the guys I'd play with, and we would talk about our coaches and how much they meant and how parents got involved with the games, I said, man, what a great avenue to go down and try to, since I have the pulpit, to go down and try to flaunt the men and women that were coaching these kids, the kids that were playing. And hell, I wasn't that much older than them. And then the 83 Dunbar basketball team came along, and at that time, in the 70s and 80s, man, Baltimore basketball was as good as anywhere in the country. Yep. Quentin Daly was the top draft pick. The 4 guys from Dunbar went in the first round. Skip Wise put Baltimore on the map, beating the map in that famous game. And, you got behind Dunbar, and then there was the Poly football program and the great lacrosse high school teams. And all of a sudden the girls sports were starting to flex their muscle because, because of Title IX and these girls, these championship teams were cropping up all over town, girl-wise, women's-wise. So, and Vince Bagley again told me, because one thing, there's always going to be high school sports. There's always going to be kids. There's always going to be parents and grandparents watching. And I never forgot
Great point. Yep.
Great. Yep. And it resonated. We started a thing called Prep Profile, which is a weekly high school scholar athlete award, where the ADs had to send in the nominations. We'd get 60 to 70, a week. And we did that for 20 years, and it became a huge success. But that was a collection of everybody involved. But it was just the influence that the men and women all, not just in Baltimore, but all over the country had on the high school athletes, which really was the motivation for me to get so deep into it. And then the cooperation that you would get when you did it.
Yeah.
You know, it was just a tremendous thing to be a part of.
Hey, Keith, you mentioned somebody a moment ago. You mentioned Dave Petramala and Hopkins lacrosse.
Yeah.
When we started Press Box, I think it must have been about 6 or 7 at that time in 2006. We were a weekly, and I think it was 6 or 7 weeks in. You did a cover story, Petro's life lessons.
Absolutely.
I know he's a good friend of yours and has been for a long time. We were fortunate enough to have him on this Zoom a couple weeks back. I find him to be incredibly motivated to get a second chapter at another chapter at coaching. How about you? You feel that?
Oh, no
way
question
about him?
about it. No question about it. Dave, in addition to being one of the greatest players of all time, was unbelievably competitive. We used to play pickup basketball games at Johns Hopkins, and we were all talking about this last week because Ted Patterson would come, a lot of guys from the Sun, Mike Preston, and a lot of coaches at Hopkins. And Dave was just kind of coming out of playing. He was assistant coaching. I don't mean to tell you, man, he was a terrific player, but he would run you through the wall to win a game. So there's no question that he wants to come back. But his coaching idol, as he may have shared with you, he shared with us on that press box story, was Bill Belichick. He got to be really good friends with Belichick because of lacrosse. Bill would send his kids down to Dave's camp. He just targeted Hopkins because he really liked the way Dave ran the program.
Yeah.
And, you know, Bill grew up in Annapolis, so he was very familiar with the Hopkins lacrosse dynasty, and they became great friends. And Petro, in that story, if you remember, Dave said when he's done coaching, he's going to take an RV and he's going to drive around the country watching college football and going up to spend time with Bill Belichick's training camp. I guarantee you that's what he did when he left Hopkins. But he'll be back. Somebody should hire Dave Petramala because he's a winner. He's a champion.
Well, he's positioned himself to have an incredible knowledge of what's going on with the sophomores and juniors that are coming up to play that will be
his kids
recruited. Yeah. And his kids
number one recruit in the country, I think. Yeah.
I know. That's amazing. Let's spin back over to sports for a while and do a quick rundown of a couple things. You covered the Ravens the last couple of years, and you see how incredible Lamar has been in the regular season. What do you make of the problems the Ravens are having in the postseason right now?
Yeah, I think it obviously stems a lot from Lamar. You know, he's been very inconsistent in the postseason. I think part of the problem we're seeing with Lamar, and this comes from some of the coaches I've heard talk, is he's wrestling with when do I tuck and run. How long do I stay in the pocket? You know, and I think that still comes with experience. And I think he's still struggling with some of the defensive looks that he sees. And there's that seed of doubt, whether to go to, option A or B. And in that seed of doubt, it's causing some issues. I do think when he came back from COVID, they kind of gave him the green light, says, hey, listen, man, just go play football.
Yeah,
just go play football, and he did, and he was the weapon we saw last year. I do think in the playoffs, particularly the Buffalo game, that he was really confused by some of the looks they gave him, and he was indecisive in making his decision whether to run or throw. But I do think though that he's got the tools to turn that around and become a really, really consistent marquee quarterback in the league. And just be a super playmaker. Now, I do think, though, that the days of him running, for 100 yards a game are going to dry up as he gets older, because they've done it with every young quarterback we've seen, from Randall Cunningham to Michael Vick, right on down the line. So if he doesn't modify his passing game a little bit more in the next year, Ravens going to have a tough decision to make, I think, in regards to what you do with him.
Gary, you got any thoughts on that?
I can't imagine them getting rid of him, but
how
long the contract is. I mean, I wouldn't get rid of him.
Well, Keith, let me ask you a bigger picture question as far as the Ravens are concerned. You know, Lamar, obviously a great talent, and he's going to be here. I can't see the Ravens.
I agree.
Yeah. But more big picture with the team. You know, Ozzie Newsome will be a Hall of Fame player. He obviously is a Hall of Fame player, Hall of Fame general manager. but now he's a special assistant, you know, an advisor. Eric DaCosta takes over the reins. He's been doing that for the last couple of years. Do you see, while they share a lot of the same philosophies, Keith, do you see a different tack or a different way that Eric is trying to build the team than what Ozzie did? Is he trying to find more speed and playmakers, perhaps, as opposed to Ozzie, who built along the line of scrimmage and tried to win the game in the trenches? That's just my personal opinion, wondering how you kind of see it.
Yeah, I think Ozzie and Eric share the exact same philosophy of what kind of player you need to win. I think the college game has changed a lot since when Eric took over, or since in the last 7 years, because of the Lamars and the Murrays, because the college game has become this spread offense, and you do have to get some speed, and you do have to get some quick, agile offensive linemen. Whereas 20 years ago, it was ground and pound, the Steelers, you know, AFC North alone, Corey Dillon, Jerome Bettis, Jamal Lewis, Fred Taylor. You weren't throwing the ball 30 times a game. You were running it, and you were trying to win the line of scrimmage. The college game has changed. The pro game has changed. I do think Eric, though, recognizes what has to happen in regards to maximizing the salary cap by re-signing his young talent as early as he can to keep him here. Now, he's going to have, to me, the biggest story of this offseason is Orlando Brown. I don't think you can let Orlando Brown go. I think he's one of the best tackles in football, Ronnie Stanley included. If I'm making the call, he's my left tackle, Ronnie Stanley's going to right tackle. Now, they have never they've never paid two tackles big-time money. Stan, correct me if I'm wrong, since they've been here. And obviously J.O. was at one for 10 years. And since then, they paid Michael Orr, and now they paid Ronnie Stanley, but they've never paid two in a row. But man, Orlando Brown is a beast. He's a man-child. He's only going to get better. I wouldn't want him to end up in the AFC North. No way. So I think that's number one, more than the edge rushers, more than adding some other depth to the offensive line. But with that said, back to your original question, I think Eric has done a really good job of taking Ozzie's baton and taking it into this generation of college football and the NFL, which has been the spread offense in college. You watch the college game. None of the offensive linemen in college get down in three-point stance. They rarely run the ball. They run the ball 15 times a game. And you're coming up in the NFL right now, and you're asking these guys to run block against Aaron Donald and Brandon Williams and J.J. Watt and these guys, and they're getting their brains beaten because they don't know how to do it. So it's really difficult to find that mesh of versatile offensive linemen. I think Eric's done a good job with Bozeman. I think he's done a great job with Orlando Brown. Keeping them will be very difficult. That's always the challenge, guys. Salary cap, every team's going to have the same problem. Who do you keep? Who do you not? But to answer your question, I think he's taken Ozzie's lead, morphed into this generation of the young football player. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, no, it's good. Stan?
Let's talk University of Maryland. In about 22 minutes, the University of Maryland will be taking on the Northwestern Wildcats out there in Chicago. I wasn't a hater at any time, but I found that Mark Turgeon, for me, had taken something that I thought was almost unscrew-upable, which was passion for Maryland basketball, and he's made a whole generation of people kind of indifferent to it. And this year, I started to be a hater a little bit. I said, this just isn't Maryland basketball. And out of nowhere, the last 8-9 games, they've been on a roll. And while they're not in the top 25, I think they go into the tournament being almost as dangerous as they've been in a long, long time. And I think they got a chance to win a game or two in the tournament. Your thoughts on the job that Turgeon's done and what you think about his future?
I think Mark's done a great job with this team in particular because they were a train wreck early in the year. They're offensive. Awful. They've never had a whole lot of offensive rhythm under him.
Yeah.
And they had zero prior to the last 5 or 6 games. But they're playing really well. They are definitely going to make the tournament. I can't believe they're not in the top 25. But with that said, I think what has happened with Mark, again, he replaced Gary Williams, who not just, and speaking strictly of Baltimore, Gary made Baltimore a monumental priority when it came to marketing the team. He was up here all the time. He would talk to the Maryland alumni guys up here all the time, the people that went to school there, not just played basketball for him. He recruited Baltimore kids, as does Mark and those guys. But I mean, Gary lived up here, literally at times. Terry Aronson, Keith Neff, all his Steve Bisciotti, they were the big Gary Mafia, I called them. They were up Baltimore guys. I don't think Mark has made the impact in Baltimore that he needs to do, am I perfectly honest with you, to keep that buzz going when you struggle. And they struggle. Add to that, Mark and his staff play the AAU game. And I think there's a lot of older basketball fans that just have no time for the AAU culture in college basketball. It's turned them off, not just at Maryland, but everywhere around the country. These one and doneers, these guys that are opting out to go
it's made the top tier college basketball really. It's just unseemly to me the way the game's played now.
It's just hard to really follow it.
Yeah,
totally agree.
I looked at somebody like Coach Krzyzewski, who I admire a great deal. I had the honor to be down in Durham 3 or 4 years and be around him a little bit and just have what he is understandable to me. And he just now, his teams never have a leader late in a season or late in a game that can really calm everybody down because they're all first year guys.
They're all gone. Yeah. Or also they're 18-year-old.
Yeah.
And they're looking for leadership, and Coach K is expecting them to be leaders. That's a great point. Yeah. It's funny because you guys know Dean Albany, our good buddy, former scout with the Orioles, now the Phillies. We were on the same wavelength. Carolina's playing Duke 2 weeks ago. He texted me, I text him. First time ever, I didn't know any players from Duke or Carolina.
Yeah,
I'm like, back when we were kids, I knew every starter, every backup for every ACC team that was playing, and it's just the AAU element to me has really hurt college basketball to the point where it's difficult to watch, as Gary said, because you really can't develop a real continuity of the players because they're in and out so much.
So
in and out of school.
Sticking with the University of Maryland, Mike Locksley finishing up his second year, and it was a bastardized season because of the pandemic. Is Tulia, how do you pronounce his last name, Gary?
Tagovailoa.
Tagovailoa.
There's a whole slew of them out there, man. Navy had a couple Tagovailoa.
Does he have a chance to help Mike Locksley make Maryland football relevant?
Well, I sure. From the small sample size. But I was very impressed with what he did. I think again Maryland's challenge will be one that I think Mark Turton is looking at. The Big Ten has always historically been tough, physical. Get these guys up front that can win the point of attack, and they still are. Ohio State, Michigan State, Nebraska. They still play some old school football, and I just don't know if the guys that Maryland's bringing in can handle a Big Ten schedule with the interior linemen that they bring in. There's skilled guys in the DMV. Yeah. Man, they're off the charts. They're everywhere, and a lot of them are in the NFL. But you need those 315, 320-pound high school kids coming out, which they get in the Big Ten, and they're just not around here. So I think that's Mike's challenge. Obviously, he's upgraded the talent pool as according to the collegiate rankings and all that stuff, or the recruiting rankings. But we'll see. I just think the Big Ten, man, is a tough road for both the basketball team and the football team.
Keith, along those lines, talking about Maryland and the Big Ten, Stan and I have talked about this before. I'm going to assume for a minute that once the pandemic is over, the fans are going to come back. I think Maryland basketball, the fans will come back. Football, who knows? But just in general, though, with Maryland, and I understand they went for the money. I understand the money in the Big Ten was a lot greater than the ACC. No doubt about it. You got to do that today. But I just wonder if there's a lack of fan support for Maryland, or put it this way, less fan support for Maryland because there's no more Duke, there's no more Carolina.
No question.
And what do you make of that?
Maryland has no more rivals.
Yeah.
Think about it. Who's their rival now in collegiate sports? They don't have one. They used to have Duke, Carolina, and Virginia. I mean, Virginia was their natural geographical rivalry, but no bigger game in College Park was Maryland and Duke. I mean, that was it, man. When both teams were national powers, which was almost for that, Gary's, well, since Lefty was there, Maryland's basketball team's been relevant. So, yeah, I agree. I'm one of them. I don't have the same fire and the same passion.
So you don't care about when they play Nebraska in basketball or Northwestern.
Northwestern, tonight they play Northwestern. No, it's not. I love the Michigan State's coach, obviously, Tommy Izzo. And I like what Juwan Howard's doing with Michigan, but there's no emotional ties that we had like we had with those guys. I mean, you wanted to beat Duke like you wanted to beat the Steelers, in football. Or the Yankees or the Red Sox. I mean, it was a passion, and that makes for a great fan base. And I agree with you guys totally, man. Up here in Baltimore, it's been pasteurized or neutralized, whatever you want to call it. It's homogenized. It's just not the same.
Keith,
Gary, you got one more, Gary, and then I'll wrap up with one.
I do. You being down in Sarasota, the Orioles are down there. Where are you with the Orioles right now? Do you see a light at the end of the tunnel? I'm not saying there's not, but is it visible at this point?
I don't see it, Gary. I don't see it. They keep, the 3-year plan's now a 6 or 7 year plan. And, I was looking at the roster today, and I'm looking at the names, and I'm thinking, my gosh, these guys are going to have a difficult time to compete. I get the fact that he's trying to build the farm system up, but you still can't win in this division with just homegrown guys. It doesn't work. You've got to eventually go out and bring some big time players in here to compete with the Yankees. The Blue Jays now, they spend a lot of money. The Rays aren't going anywhere. And Boston's had a tough couple of years, but they'll be back. So I don't see it. And again, we're talking passion. There's no passion at all for the Orioles of anyone I talk to. And that's sad. And I think part of it is because, they've eliminated their ties with B.J. Surhoff, with Terry Crowley, with Scott McGregor. And not to saying that that's going to win or lose games at this level. It's not. But, I find it really interesting that you would disregard the history of this great franchise if you're a new regime coming in. That's one thing Buck did so well. One of the first things Buck did when he got here was he took the team over to the Sports Legends Museum, and he walked downstairs and he showed them the Orioles history. And this is how and why every time you put the uniform on, you need to wear it with pride, because these people love their team, and these guys that played before you love them. And that's just not the case anymore. That's gone. They can talk all they want. That's disappeared. And I think the fans are smart enough in Baltimore to see that. Yeah, you love Ryan Mountcastle and Gunnar Henderson and Adley Rutschman. You're excited about seeing those guys. Okay, but then who else?
Well,
I agree.
Ruiz.
I got to tell you, the one guy I think that they really should re-sign right now, and I think he's in a vulnerable enough state because of what happened to him, is Trey Mancini. I mean, if you could sign Trey Mancini to a 4-year, $40 million, little bit team-friendly deal, but a deal that if he has a good year this year, he's going to go out and get the Orioles will trade him. They should be signing a guy like that, who, I got to be honest, Keith, I've been around a long time. You know me, I didn't spend a lot of time in the locker rooms.
Exactly.
He's a Brooks Robinson character type guy,
And since everyone else is gone, since Jonesy's gone, since that link of this past decade, everybody that you bonded with, Jones, J.J. Hardy, Manny, Till, they're gone. So he's the only link to what was left of that, if there is such a thing. So I agree with you. The other thing that scares me, guys, is this $100 million Masson lawsuit. This is weighing big time heavy on the boys, John and Lou, and they kind of inherited. It wasn't really their doing, but this scares me more than the talent level that they're building right now. This really worries me. Not that they're going to move, but are they going to be able to overcome this? Because they've sold off, they've gotten rid of a lot of employees, had to lay them off. I know COVID had a lot to do with that as well. That scares me more than what's happening on the field.
I think that Masson, as it stands now, may not exist in another year
I agree.
to 18 months. I
Really?
think the
agree.
Nationals will have their own thing. I wanted to close on a little bit more positive note. I'm not as negative about the Orioles as you are, Keith, but I get everything you're saying. But you're down in Sarasota. This Sarasota phenomenon, there may not be passion for the Orioles, but there is passion for Sarasota, Florida from Baltimore fans, isn't there?
No question about it. There, Baltimore fans are pouring out today. You guys know Brett Hollander.
Sure.
Yeah, so Brett and I went and had lunch today at a place called Marina Jacks. Dan, you know where the Marina Jacks. There was 20 people from Baltimore in there.
Right.
They are all over the place down here. Well, they've made this their winter destination, Sarasota, because of the Orioles.
Yep.
And a lot of them did it on the heels of those 2013, 14, 15, and 16 when they were winning divisions and they were relevant again. And listen, I love the Orioles like everybody. I hope I'm wrong.
Yep.
I hope, I do think you need to balance between analytics and scouting and all that stuff. I just don't think you can go one way or the other. I hope his way works. We'll see. But there is always going to be passion for Sarasota, man. This is one of the best places I've ever been.
Our April cover story is going to be it's going to be told through the lens of John Means, but it's really about Chris Holt and whether or not we can start developing pitching. Because I think the offense will come around in the next 2 or 3 years, with Rutschman and Kerstad and Mountcastle and a couple other guys, Austin Hayes. But man, if they don't start to develop some pitching, it's all chatter. Keith,
and if you're not going to go out and buy any, then you got to develop it.
It's been really awesome catching up with you. I can't say there's been a day that I go during the pandemic, I go, boy, I really miss Keith Mills. But I realize I haven't shaken your hand in about 18 months, probably.
Yeah, that's the truth. And Gary, I miss seeing you as well in the press.
I saw you the man.
I saw you in the press box. I was there, but I wasn't allowed to come up and say hi to you during the Ravens game.
I know, I got you.
Hey, we'll do it again.
I love you guys, man.
We'll do it again sometime. Tell Henneman if you see him that I love him. He wrote a great piece on our website about Vi Ripken. It was a terrific piece about Vi Ripken.
No question about it. I'll see you guys.
Thank you.
All right, Keith.
I want to remind you that Pressbox Live is brought to you by C3 American Exteriors. Go to their website at c3america.com to get a brand new roof for just the cost of your insurance deductible. And each time I read that website, Gary, I make a point of saying c3america.com because this company is very unique. They're called C3 American Exteriors, but the website is c3america.com. So interesting.
Got it.
All right. Hey, you've got the week off next week. We're going to have our old friend Ed Hale's going to be on, and we're working on a couple interesting things leading into the baseball season and the draft. Okay.
Sounds good, Stanley. Appreciate it.
Great to see you, Gary. I'll talk to you soon. Give my love to Julie. All right.
I will. Thank you. Same here to James.
See you, folks. And Monday night, Ross Grimsley and I will be back with ex-PR guy for the Orioles, Jeff Lance, who now works in minor league baseball. He works for MILB down there in St. Petersburg, Florida. He's going to talk about the restructuring of the minor leagues. We'll see you then. Okay. Good night, everybody.